Is this a credible plan or is this a politically convenient ambition? To what extent is geopolitical volatility actually accelerating India's transition? And to what extent it is being used as a justification to double down on domestic coal?
90% of processing is done in China or Chinese companies. So, long ago, Deng Xiaoping, who was the chairman of the Communist Party of China, said, Middle East has oil, we have rare earths. So
Mhm.
they have a chokehold of mm, processing because without processing, you will not be able to move up the value chain.
Given that we are already in a chokehold, we have started maybe a little too late. NTPC generates a third of India's electricity, mostly from coal. These are not companies you can disrupt. You have to transform them from the inside.
And even if they do anything, they're always scared there may be a vigilance case so no one wants to take that, no one is incentivized to do that. Yeah, so I think, it's a big blind spot, but I don't see that happening in 2026 at least, unless
Hello and welcome to the Carbon Circle, honest, meaningful conversation about what it truly takes to build a sustainable Bharat by 2047. I'm Roshan Ray, founder of Carbon Mandal Sustainability Consulting Services. My guest today started his career not in the laboratory or a policy chamber, but as an investigative journalist in India, reporting on people, the politics, the quiet devastation that the coal economy leaves behind. That journey took him to a PhD at the University of British Columbia, to the Asian Development Bank, and eventually to Duke University's Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability, where he serves as senior lead for international energy transitions. He is the author of Total Transition, the human side of renewable energy revolution. He co-founded the Council for Critical Minerals Development in the Global South with the UN's SE for All and UC Davis. He is co-host of the India Energy Hour with 90 episodes across 5 seasons. And in 2016, he received the Ramnath Goenka Excellence in Journalism Award, India's highest journalism honor. Sandeep, welcome to the show.
thank you so much. I'm sure your listeners are confused. Like,
So
you're
many,
on the
so
one
many
hand, you're
things.
talking about journalism. On the other hand, you're talking about academic work and various other things. So, yeah, but
Uh,
thank you so much for
Absolutely.
having me on your podcast.
An absolute privilege, Sandeep. I know it could be confusing for many to see the journey from a journalist to where you're presently there, and that's exactly what you're going to talk today on. So the topic that we've chosen today is energy security versus decarbonization. That is India's Defining Balance Act to 2047, the theme of Vikasit Bharat. So let's kick off with the origin story here. That is understanding what journalism taught you that research never could. So before we begin, I want to start with a provocation here. Sandeep, most energy transition researchers come at this with the spreadsheets and models, and you came at it with reporters' notebook and a press credential. I would argue that makes your work fundamentally different, and I would want to understand why.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Actually, if I back up a little bit more, um, by training, I'm also an engineer. So I grew up in, Jharkhand. My dad was working at a, public sector company in Ranchi. So I was born and brought up in Jharkhand in eastern India. And when I was growing up in a small town like Jharkhand, you either have, like, if you want to do something in life, you had two options. Either you're an engineer or you're a doctor. So there's no other option. You can't be a podcaster. You can't, like,
Yeah.
those were the two options that a middle class or lower middle class family gives you. And so I followed the path. I thought medical seems too tough, and I don't know if I have the ability to crack that. So I became an engineer. I did my engineering. I worked with a tech company for a very, very brief amount of time. And then at that point, I was not sure if this is for me. I was
Mm.
not sure what is for me, but I was definitely not sure that can I sit
Engineering.
all day and code, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, being a computer engineer, like my job was to code all day. And I had always been interested in public issues, political issues, but couldn't define what that meant, having no training in that. So then I just stumbled upon and, managed to become a journalist. And I worked with some newspapers like DNA newspaper, Daily News and Analysis in Bombay, and Hindustan Times in Delhi. And that's when my journey on sort of thinking about energy, climate issues really came to my sort of understanding, but it was really from a bottom-up perspective, like what's happening in coal mines and what's happening in a power station, or at that time, a very small but growing sector of renewables and so on. But yeah, like I think that really gave me a foundation and an imagination of what the realities of a physical asset. I think a lot of people don't have that understanding or realities of what it means to be around a solar plant, what it means to
Yeah.
be, what is the job of an engineer there versus a cleaner, versus how do communities perceive it? So I think journalism for me, you're right, was a really big foundation into whatever I have done in life, because it always gives me a perspective of sort of, okay, it's not just a techno-economic challenge, it's not just the economics or technical challenge. It integrates society, culture, and so on and so forth. But yes, so to cut the long story short, I think journalism was very much a foundation of how my journey has evolved.
Yeah, I'm starting as a engineer who's not so clear, but I think all of us go through that phase where we're unsure
Yeah.
about what is the right fit for us. But you found your fit in journalism. But my follow-up to that question is from journalism to pursuing a PhD. Is something very aspirational. So, what were you trying to fix here, Sandeep? Was there a specific story that you couldn't finish as a reporter that you needed to research on, or something that you need to find completion on?
Yeah, so I think journalism gave me a lot of exposure of ground up understanding of, in the beginning, I was a very generalist. I was doing everything, right? Municipal reporting, if there's another, a corruption scandal. So I was just like doing it like a generic reporter. But in the last 2 years, so I worked as a journalist for about 6 years. In the last 2 years, I got to really focus on and this was by chance, focus on like energy, climate issues broadly defined. It was still, broad in the sense today, one day you're reporting on coal bed methane gas, the other day you're reporting on carbon credit. So it was all over the place. But I was feeling that this is an area I want to understand more deeply and specialize and look beyond India as well to understand what is really going on in this space. And
Yeah,
as a reporter, you don't have that kind of opportunity to sort of, do deep reading or, engage with concepts and theories and all. And so after sort of working for a few years, I decided that maybe it's good time to do my master's and get some specialization, because
hmm,
otherwise I'll be like so generic all over the place, which has its own advantage. But so that's why I first pursued a master's program. And in the master's program, I specialized in the energy sector. And that's when I started to read a bunch of books about, written by people like Václav Smil, Daniel Yerkin, that really describes how crucial energy is for everything that we
yeah,
do, and what constraints climate brings to the energy system, to countries' growth, and so on. So that really helped me. And then, as I was finishing my master's, doing a PhD was a very natural transition, because I felt that I still needed to learn more and, pursue. But I was clear that I don't want to be a traditional academic where my job is to publish papers, but can I work on applied research? Can I do research that is really in the imagination of policymakers? Maybe they haven't thought about it, but it's coming in 3 years. Maybe stuff that is like really at the forefront today, and if we can contribute in terms of policy or technology and so on. So it was a very natural. I think from
transition.
journalism, the biggest transition I think was engineering to journalism, because it was like, what are you doing? Are you
Yeah,
serious? And then, you said because most journalists around 2009-10, they came from English literature and arts background. So for an engineer, it's changing now, but for an engineer to say like, oh, I'm going to leave my job in, a tech company that pays really well to go, that was the
Journalism.
biggest generation. From journalism, I was only already in the public policy space. So yes, the choice was whether I want to be a journalist, but I want to do my master's in journalism or specialize in a topic. So I chose specialization in a topic, and then it was very natural from there, the flow, more natural than the first transition.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you have a very interesting insight there because traditionally people who get into journalism are the ones the likes of the ones you just mentioned, either coming from English literature. But as an engineer, I think you had a different perspective on the world, maybe looking at the same issue from a more technical lens. That could have been a reason for you to see this transition into pursuing a master's in the energy domain and then going on to pursue a PhD. But Sandeep, if you were to explain your present role to the listeners, how does your everyday look like now? Or what are the kind of activities that you involve yourself with today?
Yeah, so before I do that, let me just spend 30 seconds explaining how I got here because that's so when I finished my PhD, I was working on a topic which was a really upcoming and a global topic where almost every organization was trying to get into that space, which is the topic of just energy transition. Like when you
Hmm.
transition away from low carbon sources, what do you do with the people, the communities, the regions? Suppose you're shutting down a coal mine or a oil refinery. So it was one of the first PhDs probably in the world, but definitely in India that sort of focused on that. So I was very lucky that when I graduated, I got without applying anywhere. I got jobs with sort of some of the largest think tanks to take
Hmm.
what I learned in an academic way in a more applied, policy realm. So I worked with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, then worked on there, and then I, consulted with Asian Development Bank and worked with Swaniti, and now I'm finally at Duke. So what Duke does for me is it brings because I work at essentially Duke University, which is a elite US university, and I work for a think tank of Duke University. It's called the Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability. Um, so the mandate of the think tank is, half of our one of our leg is in the university, so teaching students everything that an academic would do,
Hmm.
research, but the other leg is like collaboration with industry, governments, and bridge that gap between academia and real life. So
Yeah.
that's how, at least in US, there are many universities with think tanks whose job is to bridge that gap and bring, say, Duke scientists that are working on a particular technology and help them apply in a real world setting or a policy space and so on. I can talk more about with some examples on that. Yeah.
Surely. I mean, that makes you the right fit for the topic that you've chosen today, the energy security versus decarbonization. I mean, given that perhaps you're the one of the early few researchers in this very domain that is trying to understand the implication of energy transition here in India, gives you that much more exposure to the problem. So this gives me the right segue to the next part of the entire conversation. So let's address the problem here, Sandeep. So will look at the macro problem that is India's energy security paradox, because this is where the C-suite audience in our listener base needs to pay close attention to. So India's official position is net zero by 2070, 500 gigawatts of renewable by 2030, and energy security for 1.4 billion people simultaneously. So this is what the official position is. And I'm going to ask you this bluntly. Is this a credible plan or is this a politically convenient ambition?
I think the answer to that question is that, well, no country in the world has made a long-term plan.
Hmm.
Um, but it's a good signal. It's a really good, I mean, there is no country, there are some modeling studies from US to Europe to everywhere, including in India, that will say that, oh, if India achieves a net zero by 2070, this is the amount of renewables you have to install. This is how. But that's not an official government of India plan that, okay, by 2030, we'll have 500 gigawatts. By 2040, we will have this many gigawatts. There's no pathway that has been chosen. But it's good to have any country for that matter. It's good to have a long-term vision. So
Right.
if you, for example, you talked about C-suite employees, it's good to have your long-term vision as a company, executive, but you should also have short-term goals
Hmm.
that will lead to that long-term outcome. So the long-term outcome that India has chosen is 2070 with all the other objectives that you described, energy security for people and prosperity, all of that. But in the short term, there are some clear short-term targets of 500 gigawatts. So I think India is neither doing anything special nor different from anybody else. Barring that, one thing India has done well is India has chosen a target of 2070, which it is an articulation that there is the responsibility to address climate change goes through the pathway of common but differentiated responsibility.
Hmm.
Because all models that operate globally will tell you that every country has to achieve net zero by 2050. But India said that we did not pollute in the past, so we need more carbon space. We need more space to grow and become prosperous. So why can't India achieve net zero by 2070? Say US or Europe do it by 2040. So that will give countries like India a little bit more space. To summarize what you just asked, I think it's the right signal. Um, it may be politically convenient, but it is the right signal
Right.
that India has a net zero target and a short-term target. It would have been problematic if we just had a long-term target, but there's nothing in the short term. So I think it's the right signal. We can be more ambitious or not. That's a debate of a question.
But at least having a vision is a good signal, and I'm also for that. And as you rightly mentioned, having a long-term target is required, but along the line we need to have certain milestones. I think that's
Correct.
that's something we got to be setting right. I mean, at least the numbers on paper say that we are moving in that direction. Is it coming to reality? Yes, no. I think we'll debate more on that in the coming questions, given that India is now exploring the coal option once again, given that we have a West Asia crisis. So let me follow up with a question there. The West Asia crisis has put India's crude oil import dependency back in sharp focus. To what extent is geopolitical volatility actually accelerating India's transition, and to what extent it is being used as a justification to double down on domestic coal?
Yeah, so I see it differently. See, you'll have different people say different things about it. Just having observed the coal sector and renewable sectors for the last 15 years, I see actually very little impact in the long term. Um,
Okay.
but in the short term, which is the next 3 to 4 years, yes, there is. I mean, India doesn't have oil, India doesn't have gas. The only, base fuel that I would say, in addition to renewables that still need to grow, is coal. Like the only domestic fuel that India has is coal. It doesn't have gas, it doesn't have. So it's natural for a country to say, like, okay, you know what? I need to make sure that we have energy security for our citizens. So therefore, let's use coal as much as we can. But India has not revised any of its targets that,
Right.
like this West Asia crisis. It's not saying that, oh, we were going to
Push
use,
the
like,
next
the
year
current
target.
target for 2030 was 1.5 billion tons of coal or something like that.
Mhm.
It's not saying now we're going to use 3 billion tons by 2030, which is physically also not possible, but it's not even saying. There may be some increase, say, 10%, 5%, but it will be a short term. Renewables are really growing. It's become an economic reality. It's become a reality for India. It's not just a theoretical idea that, oh, it's coming and so coal will decline. And India's approach is what I call all the above. Because it's a country whose energy demand is growing and will grow, if India has to even lift people out of poverty and even reach, like, a middle income country status, forget about high income country status. India's energy sector will have to grow more than anybody else in terms of
Mhm.
sheer growth. So India's approach is all the above. Can I use coal? Can I use gas? Can I use renewables? Can I use nuclear? So not it's almost technology agnostic, but with the intent that our main intention is to use renewables. Uh,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean coal will go away. I'll just add one thing. It's very different from, say, countries like Europe, where there is very little energy demand growth, and there is options because then you're just replacing one thing with the other. India is a story of energy addition,
Right.
not replacement per se. But at some point, energy replacement will happen, but we're not there yet at the moment.
Yeah. So, I mean, clearly, energy transition is a long haul. And given that presently we are facing a West Asia crisis, has led to this new aspiration for opening new coal mines and everything around. But as you also rightly pointed out, there has been no communication on the change when it comes to this 2070 targets or the 2030 or the 2040 targets there. So do you think the government requires to revisit this targets once again, or do you think we are well within that margins there?
I think we're well within the margin, but one thing that government has done, and this is not because of the crisis, it was brewing before crisis, but it has really come to the fore as a result of the crisis, is push towards what is called coal gasification.
Right.
So India is saying like we don't have gas, but very recently cabinet cleared about $4 or $5 billion or 30 to 40 billion, 30 to 40 crore, 1,000 crores rupees for investing in coal gasification, which is
Right.
really, can we use this coal to gasify it and then use it as a gas? Because if crisis like West Asia happens in the future, because you can't use coal for everything, right? For
Sure.
fertilizers and sectors. So in that sense, so that's the only sort of big change I see, but it's not a change that has happened overnight. It's not as a result. Maybe it got accelerated as a result. Like it was coming, coal companies were already starting to invest in coal gasification. But other than that, I don't see any need for revision of targets at the moment. Now, if it so happens that this crisis lasts for several years, and like oil and gas is completely sort of on the margins and India is not able to access, then that's a different thing. But I don't see that happening in 2026 at least, unless there's some major crisis that just doubles or becomes just. And even then, Roshan, I don't think India can just produce that much coal.
Right.
um like there's the physical reality, and this is really from my journalism days. Like it takes a lot of time to start a mine. It takes a lot of time to then produce the kind of mining, that has like a 5 or 10 year lag period. So
Hmm.
if India decides like, oh, we're going to double the target, they have to decide now, and then everything has to go well for the next 10 years to actually produce. And if
Right.
you're not producing, then you're again import dependent on Indonesia and all that. So I don't think it's not going to make or break India's climate targets.
Okay.
It may prolong a little bit, a few years. It could lead to a little bit of increase in coal use, but yeah, I'm not convinced that it can derail India's trajectory for net zero.
I mean, interesting perspective there, because clearly, I mean, as a developing country, our demand for energy is only going to go up as we, head towards being the developed version of the country, which also goes on to say that we can't just have one source of energy. We need to have clearly a mix of different sources of energy there. But this conversation that has begun around the West Asia crisis, so having a transition or giving more focus to coal, there is a contradictory opinion that is also coming out, which says that the quality of coal that we have in India has a larger ash content, which means, I mean, even today we import coal from outside. I mean, largely Australia. So, what are your thoughts on India pursuing this direction presently? Do you think we will achieve a long-term stability by pursuing this ambition, or do you see this as a short-term solution for the existing West Asia crisis, where we are heavily dependent on crude from these countries?
Yeah, so is your question, sorry, just a clarification on the question. Is your question that because the coal is not of high quality,
Yeah.
is it prudent to use that? If you can just kind of clarify that
Yeah,
question a
that is
little.
that's exactly my question. Given that we have a not so great quality of coal here in India, so would pursuing the coal gasification as an option, alternative to the crude oil that we import from West Asia, do you see this as a long-term strategy for energy security, or do you see this as a short-term solution for the ongoing problem that we presently see?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, if India can tap this, and there are challenges about technology, coal gasification globally is not like a very well-established sector, and especially like you very rightly pointed out that coal gasification with a very bad ash content coal makes it even harder. But that is where government is coming and saying, we'll give you viability gap funding. Can you do
Hmm.
research and innovation and help overcome that technical challenge. This is not a commercial, or this is not a policy challenge. I mean, there may be some aspects that can be improved, but it's
Yeah.
really a technology challenge. And I do believe that technologies evolve, and I know so many startups that are looking into sort of like how do you separate the ash content and use. So if India can solve this technology, really predominantly a tech challenge of using this ash content, or even if you don't want to gasify, like come up with products that are sort of that are okay with this kind of ash content. I think it's only going to benefit India, and it'll put India in a stronger position. Because the
Right.
alternative is, if oil and gas is not coming, then India will have to continue to import more good quality coal from Australia, Indonesia, South Africa, etc. So I think Atmanirbharta is a really good concept. And the more you have options in your hand, whether it's coal gasification, nuclear, in different spaces, the better.
Hmm.
So I'm very much for coal gasification. And I would just add one more thing. There are some studies that I don't know if they're published yet, but I have peer reviewed some studies um, that actually shows that if you do coal gasification, the overall emissions, per kg of coal will come down. Um,
Okay.
but as opposed to burning that coal in a power plant, if you gasify that coal, the emissions will be 50% less. So if
Okay.
that leads to better use of coal and efficient use of coal with lesser emissions, and that speaks to energy security, I think it's a win-win. It's an evolving sector. I think hopefully we can speak again in the future, say 3 years, 5 years from now, and we will really see how this journey has gone.
Right, right. The one of the reason I asked you that question is, if we compare India to other global players like China, who is heavily into coal gasification. I mean, I do understand a copy paste of solution is not the right way forward. But if you were to just look at various countries across the globe and then compare India's trajectory when it comes to coal gasification here. Do you think India is doing everything right, or are there any suggestions as a researcher that you would have to be mindful of if we were to pursue this trajectory?
Yeah, I mean, look, many countries that are very serious about this have started this journey 30 years back. And when I say
Yeah.
many countries, I'm really talking about US and China, right?
Hmm.
Like what happens is this is not unique to coal gasification. I work in the critical mineral space, which I think we will explore. Like we did a technology review. I'm just giving you an example of processing technology. So everybody mining companies in India and everywhere else know how to mine. There are many challenges, but it's who processes this and
Hmm.
converts that into rare earths and all of that matters. So we did a review of like who is investing in R&D, who is investing in pilot projects on technology. And you will look at stuff, and it's mainly US and China, and there are some pockets in Canada and Australia and all that. Like we couldn't find many good startups or so what happens is like in critical minerals, like in coal gasification, this is stuff India is trying to copy from somewhere else. This is not indigenous to India. It's not like
Yeah.
India had a program in 90s where a bunch of state-of-the-art labs in India were focused. So it's ready. What India is doing today is it's looking for technology from the West, or I don't know, China, perhaps not, but technology from the West. So it will always be dependent unless we have a robust R&D program. So yes, but the state-owned companies, the PSUs in India, like Coal India, they have deep pockets, so they can acquire some of the
Right.
technology partners, but then you're executing a project. You're not owning the technology.
The
Technology is owned
technology.
by somebody else. Yeah.
Right.
So
So one.
so I would say like if there is one lesson, not specifically on this, there are so many technologies that will be the technology of the future, not the
Right.
technology of today. I think India needs to have a very strong and robust R&D, even if it has like a big lead time of 20 years, 15 years, when the technology will mature from TRL 0 to TRL 6, 7, 8, technology readiness levels. Um, Without that, India will always be an adopter, barring there
Right.
may be some pockets of certain specific niches where India has invested a lot. But
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think that's a very good insight there again. That is focused largely on the R&D. I think that's one key suggestion that you've provided. Given that we do not have an native tech that we can rely on, we would have to rely on technology that is present outside India, which makes us again dependent on other nations for the same. And given the present geopolitical situations, there is no clarity. There is so much volatility going around. I think the next question that I'm going to ask is again a difficult one because I myself feel it's difficult to answer this. But let me throw it your way. So for a CFO sitting in a manufacturing company, let's say steel, cement, chemicals, that depends on coal-based power and now is facing pressure from regions like Europe, given the CBAM implications. What is the honest timeline they should be planning against? Do you see a timeline where they should be preparing themselves for this new CBAM carbon border adjustment?
Mm. Yeah, so I mean, look, if you're a CFO in a manufacturing unit that might be impacted by some kind of CBAM operations, I think you have to plan in a way you are either able to offset, so increasingly industries should increasingly try to rely on sort of like renewable energy or clean energy sources, and I think that's a given. But I also think that India is not going to just sit tight and say, as a country, like, okay, you can impose all these tariffs on us and so well and good. So India has resisted a lot of this Western sort of bias towards like, okay, you phase out your coal and um, and 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 the reason I say this is like this is going to impact the India's manufacturing sector, as you said. And so there will be a political resistance, but as a company to prepare yourself, because if even if the government of India can resist it now through different trade measures and so on, in the future, I think the more green you are, the
The
better
better.
you are in terms of both accessing finance, but also selling your products in different markets. So, in terms of timelines, I think, every company should have a net zero target. If you are a manufacturing CFO, I would urge you to advocate for a net zero target that works for you. Um, have a net zero target, reduce your emissions as much as document the reduction where you are
Report it.
reducing emissions. Yeah, so that you can articulate that. I've worked with some small and medium enterprises in India where they are actually doing some green things, but they're not even like thinking about it, or they've converted their boiler from coal based to gas based, and that's a reduction of emissions by
Mm.
half.
Yeah.
And you can actually sell that in and say, look, I've reduced my emissions. But so document it, have a clear target, have a clear sustainability policy, And that will only help you in the future, whether India is able to resist CBAM or not. CBAMs of the world are coming again. And right now in US, we have an administration which is, pro coal or pro fossil fuels, but this is going to change. This is not a permanent feature, a different administration. And when US will move in a climate friendly messaging way, every
Mhm.
country gets empowered to sort of say that, and increasingly more and more countries will have those mandates. So it's only beneficial.
Yeah, yeah. So a clear suggestion is have a net zero target and incorporate sustainability into their core policies, so that at least they can start looking at realistic timelines. I mean, I myself sometimes get queries that we need the reports by tomorrow. Can you generate by tomorrow? Unrealistic. But again, I think when we have discussed the problem in this detail, it's also important that we look at the solution bit of it. Uh, so let's look into the state-owned enterprises, the methane problem, and the transition architecture that exists. So, Coal India employs around 250,000 people directly and supports the livelihood of millions more. The NTPC generates a third of India's electricity, mostly from coal. These are not companies you can disrupt. You have to transform them from the inside. So, walk us through what that actually looks like. I mean, you also highlighted that these companies have deep pockets. So, what would the transition from the inside look like for these companies?
Yeah, yeah. So each will be different because it's a different sector. But in general, um, a lot of focus has gone globally into looking at like how do we, like, from people, whether it's in the philanthropy world or it's in the activism world or even the global architecture around UN and stuff. A lot of focus has been to always demonize fossil fuel companies. Now
Yeah,
that has its core argument. I'm giving you a little bit of a philosophical, uh, but most of the fossil fuels globally is produced by state-owned companies. So
yeah,
they are not a private sector investor with, a shareholder that is here to make tons and tons of money. Um, it is owned by governments. And so there is always a welfare mandate. There is always like, the reason why a Coal India or an NTPC exists is to provide energy security to the country.
and insurance.
Yeah, exactly. And so as India achieves a net zero target or tries to achieve, these companies are too big to fail in some senses. Like a Coal India, if a Coal India doesn't exist in 2070, what happens to 5 or 6 states where it has massive assets, labor, land, spending under CSR, money that it gives in royalties to state governments, and so on. So I think the idea is like, how do you convert, say, a Coal India into an Energy India, or
Right.
a company that right now 99% of their revenue comes from coal mining. Can it substantially reduce, and let's say it does critical minerals, let's say it does get into manufacturing, processing, or even non-energy sectors, like, Coal India has so many hospitals and schools. Can it get into like those non-energy sector spaces? And so the idea is like, how do you diversify? And that diversification doesn't happen overnight. We have seen companies completely crash if they have not diversified. So the idea is like, can you actually get a Coal India to think strategically? And the good news is that a lot of Indian or state-owned companies have now started to think about it. It's a very tough job because if in your entire life as a company you
The
have
carbon
done
cycle.
one thing and one thing, suddenly to create, say, like I'm going to do solar, you don't even have skilled trained workforce to even think in that direction. And it's a bureaucracy, it's their government employees, so it's not so easy. There's so many government regulations. If an NTPC wants to, let's say, go and buy a copper mine in Chile, they just can't do it. Like, in relation, let's say a Tata or an Adani, they can just go and make a deal, and next week you can have that deal, if in theory. Uh, but a state-owned company, they'll have to come back, they'll have to have agreements, hope that that country and Chile doesn't, like India and Chile doesn't have a, like a geopolitical conflict. You have to get a bunch of approvals. In between, your secretary has retired, so then you get a reapproval. So it's a tough journey, but they do have deep pockets to it. And for the last 5 years, I would say that these companies have set up separate, either a subsidiary company or a separate directorate to actually look into diversification and the future of this work,
So, so
and to survive and thrive.
Yeah, so diversification seems to be the likely option going forward. That is, increase your revenue share, which is heavily dependent on coal and other fossil-based fuel, to something maybe a little more renewable, maybe get into critical earth. Here is a follow-up to that question. I think you answered it in to some extent. But what is the single biggest internal barrier to transition inside this organization? Is it capital? Is it culture? Or is it just political will?
I think it's both culture, skilled workforce,
Hmm.
and and maybe the freedom to go and make deals. So culture, like we discussed, culture and skills is like, you know, suppose you were a mining engineer for 30 years. Now you've become the head of sort of Coal India's solar subsidiary. I mean,
Hmm.
you can't just like, you don't know the market, you don't understand the dynamics. And they won't have an outsider the way, like it can sometimes happen and sometimes it have happened, but typically private sector people don't, leave being the CEO or director of a large private company and join a PSU and earn maybe like 50 times less money,
Yeah.
and and so on. So it's just a overall cultural big transition that happens, and some PSUs are much better at this in terms of like involving consultants and various other companies in different forms, or forming subsidiaries that are sort of like semi-government and has a little bit more autonomy and so on. So that's a very big part. The second, definitely the big part is political, because all these companies at the end of the day are owned by
So,
related ministries by government of India, and it really depends on the minister, the secretary, the bureaucracy. They just can't do deals on their own. The big deals. They can't just say like, okay, let me increase my target from 5 gigawatts of solar to 50 overnight. Like they will need levels of approvals to do that.
yeah, a lot
And
of
the
bureaucracy.
risk-taking appetite, this is very important. The risk-taking appetite is very less. So suppose you are a director of a solar subsidiary of NTPC or Coal India or whatever, or one of the PSUs, and say you want to invest, say, 10,000 crores in this venture. For some reason, and genuine reason, you are not able to acquire land. You've made the target, you've made the investment, you're not able to acquire land, there's no transmission, and you go into loss. There are options. They're scared that there may be vigilance cases against them.
Hmm.
Yeah. Because you're part of the state. And so that makes it very challenging for people to take big risks. Um, and sometimes they feel very discouraged. So we work a lot with some of them. And so, but there is still a lot of progress happening.
Yeah, I
Having
mean
said all of this.
the challenges are very very real in that case. Given the culture, you have set doing something for so many years, sudden transition becomes difficult. But capital, as you, I think that's not the problem because these companies have huge pockets. But
Yeah.
political will seems to be the overarching barrier in this case. I mean, just to get your thoughts on this. If the senior leadership has a very clear strategy vision to switch to renewables and have clear NDCs, nationally determined contributions here. Do you think that would allow for these companies to transition, given that there is a mandate from the senior leadership? I mean, when I say the senior leadership, the political will.
No. Yes and no. Yes, it will definitely help in terms of like, we need to do something, but
Mhm.
implementation will then trickle down to very local levels. And when implementation trickles down to, let's say, a general manager who has been given a 3 gigawatt target, but he's retiring and or he or she is retiring in 8 months from now, they don't care about this target. Like, why should they spend their retirement time, which is going to be just 8 months away or 10 months, which happens often, trying to achieve or do anything special that they don't need to do or have very little incentive to do. And even if they do anything, they're always scared there may be a vigilance case or, so no one wants to take that, no one is incentivized to do that. But having a big target really helps because it gives the right signal. And maybe some may not do it, but others have a more bigger tenure. I think this challenge of tenure, this challenge of structure, and autonomy. See, in a private company, if the board takes a decision, let's invest in this, and there is clear rationale, and for a business, for some business reasons or some risk reasons that they didn't perceive, the deal doesn't go through and they lose a little bit of money, no one is going to like put them behind bars,
Yeah.
right? Unless they're doing some corruption. But in this case, even for genuine cases, there may be, people may be scared or sort of, and then transfers are so common. Like you're working on solar for 6 months and you're like very passionate, and then suddenly you're put in
Definitely.
charge of like corporate planning.
Yeah.
So this is a big sort of challenge as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there are two things that you have clearly highlighted. One is these companies clearly have to diversify if they were to stay relevant, and having a strong political will on the at least on the top layer would allow for companies to maybe transition in that direction. But the cultural aspect is also a problem, which you have highlighted that there is no clear incentives for people in positions of power to make these transitions. So I think my follow-up question is because one solution that the present government is considering is privatization, like the Flyer, the Air India, all of this. So do you think these companies will also take that direction of privatization, or do you see it other way?
So many could be prioritized, but some of these larger companies like NTPC and Coal India, they will be disinvested. So if Government of India had 100% holding, they will bring it down to like, that's the plan anyway, to bring it down to like, let's say 51% holding, still have that, but, they have a larger share of stakeholders and institutional investors. But that is the direction that all these companies are moving to. But I'm not sure if any government will be ready to take the leap of
Yeah.
completely making them private because they are profitable. There is a lot of they give so much dividend to Government of India, and that runs everything from school programs to
The
social
free.
sector scheme. Yeah, like because if you privatize it completely, you're losing all that revenue. um the second big thing is like if you say privatize a Coal India fully, then you can't tell a private company that you can't sell your coal. Like coal prices have not increased despite production increasing for like so long. Like
Yeah.
it's even despite so much inflation, they're actually subsidizing
Subsidized.
everything. So when you bring market forces and make it open to market, then it may have impact on the energy security. And
So
like if so there is this tension whether it should be fully privatized or not. But right now the mandate is to still hold majority shares, but not fully privatized. Because once you fully privatize, government may
the
lose
structure.
revenues. There may be price fluctuations because you have to sort of agree to it's a private market between two private transactions. So
Yeah.
government will be only able to control so much and so on. So I think there is that challenge.
Yeah, I am of the similar opinion because privatizing certain key sectors entirely will threaten the security of the entire ecosystem. Given that we need to provide the citizens of the country affordable energy, in the shortest period of time. So privatizing everything would then allow for market forces to kind of come in and have their play. But Sandeep, thank you. I think you have given a lot of insights into the problem point and also the solutions and how these companies can likely see a transition. I would also want you to throw some light on the methane aspect of things, because methane is one element in this entire scheme of things that has not been spoken of in the NDCs. So what are your thoughts on this? I mean, coal, methane,
Yeah.
how are they linked, and what is the implications of not having it on the NDCs?
Yeah, so I think, it's a big blind spot in the India's sort of, especially the coal one is, there is a lot of discussion about should we talk about methane emissions in agriculture sector, but given the farmers and farm holdings are so small, you know, it should not burden our farmers. So that's why India has now joined, not so much because of fossil fuel methane, but because of the agricultural and livestock methane, that India doesn't want to join any global pledge on methane. On the fossil fuel sector side, especially coal, which I'm tracking much more closely, uh, India has decided to close 150 mines, not because of climate reason, not because of it, they're just inefficient underground mines. As India plans to close these mines, if there is no methane capture plan, they will continue to emit methane for the
Right.
next sort of like 20 plus years.
Yeah.
The good news is that India has a new regulation on mine closure that talks about responsible mine closure, and it talks about just energy transition, making sure that, uh, workers and communities that live around those mines, their livelihoods are protected. There's a direction around repurposing and reuse of that land. But what is missing right now is the methane, like to do anything about methane abatement. But my hope is that in the next iteration of this, we will have something strong on methane as well, and it should be part of the mine closure policy. If not, the current estimate is about 2.8 million tons of CH4 carbon methane is emitted per year, according to International Energy Agency. That is equivalent to emissions from 15 gigawatts of coal-fired power plants, or the whole emissions of Mongolia, the country of Mongolia. So I think we can't just ignore it. I think we can, and we should have a methane policy around, and that is a gas you can also use as a replacement of coal. So it will also help with energy security.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, just for the listeners to give some context, methane as a gas is 25 times more potent as compared to CO2 when it comes to global warming. So the amount of problem that it could add to the existing one is quite humongous. And when you say that 150 mines are being closed and there is no clear mandate or policy on the closure aspect of them, but it is reassuring to learn from you that now India has begun something in that direction where there are certain policies that are being put in place so that there is an appropriate way to abate for methane. Uh, I think we have covered quite a, number of topics here and dived a little deep in each of them. So now I would want to switch gears into something a little different. We will get into the critical minerals. So I would want you to zoom out from the supply chain challenge that in many ways underpins the entire clean energy future. That is the critical minerals. So because if we don't solve for this, the energy transition stalls regardless of policy. Because when we talk about renewable energy, it is so dependent on all of these critical minerals. I mean, we take solar panels or EVs, they're all dependent. So my first question in this regard is the global south holds much of the world's mineral wealth, but has historically exported raw minerals and imported processed goods, largely from China, which holds 60 to 80% of the monopoly on the entire critical earth. So, what would it concretely take for India to capture value-added processing rather than just selling ore? What's standing in the way presently for India in this case?
Processing technology. Um, It's so there is, let me just back up a little bit. So you do mining, then you do
Hmm.
processing and beneficiation, and then you do, then you have like a rare earth ore or a lithium ore, and then you use that to do manufacturing. So right now, globally, mining happens in different countries around the world. So, for example, Democratic Republic of Congo is the largest sort of cobalt producer, nickel in Indonesia. But most of this processing is happening in China or by Chinese companies. So
Right.
for rare earths, one of the most critical minerals, 90% of processing is done in China or Chinese companies. So long ago, Deng Xiaoping, who was the chairman of the Communist Party of China and like the president of China had said, uh, Middle East has oil, we have rare earths. So
Hmm.
they have a chokehold of mm, processing, because without processing, you will not be able to move up the value chain. And a lot of Indian companies are interested in this processing technology, but it is now again coming down to that R&D question, because this is something US has been working for 20 years, China has been working for 40 years, and now they're seeing the fruits of this. So at this stage, barring a few certain types of technologies, unless Indian labs become so advanced so fast, I think there is a chokehold of and dependence on this processing technology from globally. I'm not worried about mining, because mining is something Indian private and public sector companies know.
No.
And there is a state-owned company for every critical mineral, copper, manganese. But how do you take that feedstock and process it is the key challenge of the future.
Oh, very clearly, a couple of countries that you named have a head start, 40 years for China, 20 years for US. So, very clearly, India has fallen behind in that race, and right now we are in a chokehold. So my immediate question is, how do we get out of this chokehold? Are there any particular area that in this entire supply chain that India could tap into to begin with and gradually build expertise in that? Because mining is something, as you clearly mentioned, that India has the knows the and has the know-hows. The tech exists, the operation capability exists, but when it comes to processing this critical earth, one problem is also the pollution part of it. So what are your thoughts? Are there any way that we can get out of this chokehold?
I think maybe what India can do is, while India has a big list of critical minerals, maybe what India can do is focus attention on, let's say, the top five or top seven, and then really invest in R&D domestically and be open to big deals globally. And, with tech companies, tech providers, universities, every university in the US, every major university in US has a critical mineral hub, which is an
Hmm.
interdisciplinary hub. I think it'll be great to see something like that in India, and like and put in that capital, that money in industry partnership to enhance. Look at alternate ways to extract critical minerals. We have such a massive feedstock of coal waste. I think, investing in research and R&D, collaborations with labs, universities, startups overseas, and large companies where possible overseas is how India can focus on. But focus on a few critical minerals rather than like try to be an expert on processing of everything, like
Everything.
lithium, rare earths, a few others. Um, Maybe, this is where also skilling is very important. India doesn't have a processing workforce. There's not many courses that actually teach you processing technology of rare earths and so on. So
Yeah.
maybe start like skilling school on all these things. So you have to build this ecosystem. Invest now, maybe the fruits will start to show up in 5 years from now. And I think India needs to be patient. Like, this is not something that can happen overnight, right? Like, unless you are just bringing a big technology provider and you're just kind of executing a project.
Yeah. I mean, This question is clearly very difficult to answer because given that we are already in a chokehold, we have started maybe a little too late. And given the present geopolitical scenario, the supply chain disruptions, there is less confidence. All countries are talking more nationalistic. Uh, when we talk about the supply chain, it's getting even more difficult. And with India's ambition to uh, have a larger solar installation plus infusion of larger EVs in the transportation segment, and many other renewable areas that we are exploring. The dependency on this critical earth minerals becomes even more important, and clearly we are not doing enough in the R&D. So I think if someone were listening to this, maybe this is a wake up call for Indian institutes to have better partnership, better tie-ups, and maybe invest a little more into the R&D and spend on that capacity building so that over the period of time we can reap the benefits that we saw today. Great. Sandeep, my next question is related to the present information that is out on the news, which is the mineral security partnership that we have had with US and other allies. Uh, so my question is this MSP credible or is it just a press release? Did you see this of strategic importance?
Yeah, so I think now it's called Forge. It's like the same wine in the new bottle. Um, so there is a big agreement right now between US and India, but having worked in the US India space for a while, I think it it will it will require somebody to take that big partnership to now then execute, um, sort of, like uh, come up with like a say like for example, I'm just throwing an example. Say Coal India, like, oh, we want
Hmm.
to do lithium processing. So let's have a tie-up with four startups in US. Or the other way around, we have all that feedstock of waste coal. Do you want to come and experiment here? But this is something that both India and US governments and the ecosystem have to be serious and be involved around. Otherwise, I mean, it's a good signal, but I am not sure what it will lead to. And that also depends a lot on the US political stability because
Yeah,
US is almost spiraling, sometimes in good relations, sometimes in bad relation. And
yeah,
so if unless there is a stable work program, an implementation program of who will do what, I think this is a nice to have partnership.
right.
But one thing I'll say, like, even if the first doesn't happen in a structured way, this is a signal for private sector to try to collaborate, and some of that organically might happen because
Yeah.
of this.
Sure. I mean, I recently also heard Mr. Jaishankar speak on this because there are certain overlapping interests where definitely collaboration should be possible and maybe more so for private players as compared to the PSUs. Uh, I have one last question. This is more of a personal question. Uh, so I want to make it concrete because our listeners are business leaders and sustainability professionals who are trying to figure out their next move. So Sandeep, when you look at Indian businesses, manufacturers, infrastructure companies, supply chains, what is the biggest internal gap you see in how they handle their carbon and climate risk, and where does partner like ourselves, Carbon Bundle, fit into this entire gap?
Yeah, I think many, what I see, not all, many actually do a good job, but many don't even have a signal
Hmm.
for that they want to be green, even if sometimes they're actually pretty green. So having an explicit net zero target, I will refer back to what I was saying, having a clear corporate policy of diversification, having a clear, say, just transition policy, a corporate policy on ESG, and I mean, I'm just listing them separate. They can be one integrated sustainability policy with chapters, but having something like that is a really good signal uh, for the world that you are moving into. And that requires not just a signal or a definition or what it means, but a detailed procedure of how you will explore and get to that stage. So I think that's something almost every company in India should try to have, and that will only help both in accessing finance, giving the right signal, being future ready for what the world might look like.
Amazing. Sandeep, thank you so much. I think we have covered quite a range of topics, deep dived into quite a number of them, starting from your journey to looking into the problem area. On one hand, we're talking about decarbonization. On the other side, we also have to manage energy security, which means the implications on coal mining, the coal gasification. We also looked at the solutions around how these companies require to transition, diversify. We also looked at one more critical supply chain aspect, which is the critical earth minerals. Uh, you have given a lot of insight, a lot of perspectives, some good suggestions for C-suite level executives to take you from. Uh, it was an absolute pleasure, Sandeep. So this has been exactly the kind of conversation the Carbon Circle exists for. Any last parting words?
No, I just want to thank you and thank you for all good and challenging questions. I really enjoyed talking to you, and really good luck to the podcast. And I think we need such deeper conversations on various topics. So, bravo to you and to your team, and thank you for having me.
So, what I'm taking away today is this: the energy transition is not a distant event on a policy calendar, it is happening right now. The question is not whether it will affect you, the question is whether you are ready. And the companies that start building the transition strategy today will be the ones that lead in 2047. Sunday, for our listeners who want to follow your work, read Total Transition or tune into the India Energy Hour, all links are in the show notes below. And if today's conversation sparked a question about your own organization, your own carbon footprint, your climate risk, your ESG readiness, come talk to us at the Carbon Bundle. We help Indian businesses turn sustainability from a question mark to a competitive edge. This is the Carbon Circle. I'm Roshan Rai. Until next time, keep questioning, keep building, and keep moving towards a sustainable Bharat. Thank you so much.